So you may have heard recently that China is very upset with Elon Musk at the moment. What's the deal with that? Well, on the surface, this is all about Starlink satellites nearly smashing into the new Chinese space station. Allegedly. And of course, we all know that collisions in space are bad news for everyone. But there's a lot going on here beneath the headline that is really interesting to talk about. In many ways, this is more about politics than it is about space collisions, and this is a subject that is only going to become more and more heated as our expansion of human civilization into low Earth orbit continues over the years and decades to come. So this is good stuff to know and pay attention to. Let's get going. Okay, so the heart of the matter here is a letter written to the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space earlier this month, wherein China said that Tiangong, its new space station, had to maneuver to avoid one Starlink satellite, first in July and another in October. Tiangong had to take, quote, preventative collision avoidance control during the two close encounters after the Starlink satellites had moved into orbits that Tiangong's operators found too close for comfort. The note went on to say that the incidents, quote, constituted dangers to the life or health of astronauts on board the China space station, and asked the UN Secretary General to circulate the above-mentioned information to all states parties to the Outer Space Treaty. Allegedly. The incidents behind the complaints lodged with the UN Space Agency have not yet been independently verified. And if we dive a little bit deeper into the Chinese document, we can see some more of the details that they're upset about. Both incidents highlight that the Starlink satellites in question had both either recently changed orbit or were in the process of changing orbit when China identified them as threats to the station. For Incident 1, they write, as from 19 April 2020, the Starlink 1095 satellite had been traveling stably in orbit at an average altitude of around 555 kilometers. Between 16 May and 24 June 2021, the Starlink 1095 satellite maneuvered continuously to an orbit of around 382 kilometers and then stayed in that orbit. A closer encounter occurred between the Starlink 1095 satellite and the China space station on the 1st of July 2021. For safety reasons, the China space station took the initiative to conduct an evasive maneuver in the evening of that day to avoid a potential collision between the two spacecrafts. Just for scale, the International Space Station maintains an average height of around 400 kilometers, so it's in the same ballpark as well. And when we talk about close encounters in space, there could still be as much as 1 kilometer of distance between the objects at the nearest point. On the second avoidance, China states, on 21 October 2021, the Starlink 2305 satellite had a subsequent close encounter with the China space station. As the satellite was continuously maneuvering, the maneuver strategy was unknown and orbital errors were hard to be assessed. There was thus a collision risk between the Starlink 2305 satellite and the China space station. To ensure the safety and lives of in-orbit astronauts, the China space station performed an evasive maneuver again on the same day to avoid a potential collision between the two spacecrafts. This one is pretty interesting because it seems to insinuate that the Starlink was moving erratically, or at least in an unpredictable way, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Of course, the reason that China saw this as an opportunity to take some shots at America and inform their global peers about these issues is that any kind of collision happening in space is serious business and would be catastrophic for anyone who has orbital infrastructure or even uses orbital infrastructure for their nation. This is what's known as the Kessler Syndrome. And the regulars out there know that we've described this a few times in the past, but I'll do it again because it's pretty fun to say. So, if two space objects were to ever smash into each other, then they would inevitably send chunks of debris flying out at supersonic speeds into the vacuum of space at all angles. Then those chunks would smash into other space objects, which would break off more chunks that would fly off and smash into more objects. and on until everything is smashed and there's just a giant cloud of broken shit orbiting the Earth and everything is ruined. It would be best if that didn't happen. Still, it's pretty unusual for a country to lodge a complaint through an informational bulletin like this. As serious as near-miss events are in orbit, they happen a lot. It was actually reported this summer that Starlink satellites are involved in over 1,500 close encounters in orbit weekly. Now, 2/3 of those involve other Starlinks, but that still leaves hundreds of incidents with other operators in your average week. Of course, there are people in the Tiangong, which makes it an exceptional case, and I'm sure China is still very protective of the station since they only got it into orbit this year. It's like a new car that you're paranoid about getting scratched, except that it costs billions and billions and billions of dollars. And just a quick note to make, the Chinese space program is nothing to ignore. There were 46 Chinese Long March rocket launches in 2021, compared to 31 launches of the SpaceX Falcon. So the Chinese are very active in space, and we will be hearing a lot more from them in the future. And this outrage has apparently carried over from the Chinese government to the people of China and was targeted at Elon Musk specifically. Because, of course, the cool thing to do these days is flame Elon on social media, which in this case is Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter, which they use because real Twitter is banned. I was hoping to find some sick burns on here, but I guess that's probably not allowed on communist social media. One user describes Starlink satellites as just a pile of space junk. Another fellow said the satellites are American space warfare weapons, and Musk is a new weapon created by the US government and military. Another posted, the risks of Starlink are being gradually exposed. The whole human race will pay for their business activities. If any of our viewers are Chinese and have some better examples, please drop them in the comment section below. Of course, anyone who is familiar with the subject would know how comical it is for China, of all people, to be complaining about space junk and near misses in orbit. We've all heard about the incident on November 15th when the Russians decided to blow up one of their old satellites with a missile launch from the ground. I guess just to remind everyone that they're scary, or maybe just for fun, I'm not really sure. I've never blown up anything with a missile, but I do bet it's pretty dope. Anyway, that caused a big cloud of random debris that happened to be right in that 400-ish kilometer high orbit that the ISS hangs out in, and had the astronauts up there fearing for their lives in the aftermath of the explosion. The debris cloud is still interfering with scheduled spacewalks and probably will be for the foreseeable future. Most nations of the world are pretty pissed about the whole thing, to which Russia has responded by essentially just flipping us the bird and telling everyone to quit whining about it. And so far, it doesn't seem like any nation has a real response to that, not even the United States, which I thought was the whole reason for having a Space Force in the first place. But either way, one country that we haven't heard from on the matter is China. If they were upset about that one, they didn't feel the need to tell anyone about it. And the reason for that is probably that China also thinks it's fun to blow shit up in space. In 2007, China destroyed one of their own weather satellites in orbit with a ballistic missile and created the largest debris event in aerospace history. The International Space Station has several times over the past 10 years had to dodge pieces from that explosion. And that's not to say the Western nations are without sin here, but the last time the United States launched a satellite intercept test was in 1985, and everyone responsible is probably dead now, so it's hard to stay angry at them. This is something that is going to continue to be hotly debated for years to come. Is Starlink dangerous? Is Elon Musk trying to put too many satellites into orbit to achieve his goal? Well, the whole point of Starlink is to provide high bandwidth, low latency internet to every location on the globe. Doesn't matter if you have fiber optics or 5G, wherever you might be, if you can see the sky, then you can use Starlink, which is probably the only way that we will ever have consistent and equitable access to the internet worldwide. So this isn't all for nothing, it's a very important project, not just to the US, but the entire world. Starlink has deployed around 1,900 satellites so far. Not all of them are in service, and a few have already been decommissioned and destroyed. We'll get into how that works in a second, though. First, Just for comparison's sake, there are currently something like 30,000 satellites and other debris believed to be orbiting the planet. So even if you count every single Starlink ever launched, they account for 1/15 the total volume of space objects. SpaceX does own more space objects than any other single entity, but by volume, their property has a negligible impact on the total amount of stuff that's up there. Now, Elon Musk does have a master plan to launch tens of thousands more Starlink satellites in the years to come, as many as 30 or even 40,000. So yes, at that point, SpaceX would no longer be a drop in the bucket, but we also need to consider how a Starlink is designed to work. Each satellite can use their onboard Krypton-powered ion thrusters to move. This propulsion system can also be used to deorbit a satellite if it stops working, and to avoid contributing to space junk, the satellites are designed to easily burn up in Earth's atmosphere. The reason Starlink internet works so well is because the satellites are in a fairly low Earth orbit. Low altitude means low latency. They're all about 600 kilometers in altitude, and that also enables the dead satellites to deorbit in less than 5 years due to strong atmospheric drag. Satellites operating at higher altitudes can take decades to decay and burn up, but Starlink is designed for a relatively short life and a quick, efficient death. So even if Elon does ever launch 30,000 more by some point in the future, all of the Starlinks currently in orbit will have vaporized by that time. And to further calm everyone down about Kessler Syndrome, SpaceX released a full presentation in August 2021 of the Starlink collision avoidance system. The first section details their precautions against Starlink on Starlink collisions, which is pretty easy. They just assign each satellite its own slot in orbit, and each slot is positioned so that it can't possibly collide with any other slot. Each Starlink maintains its slot with position-keeping burns from the onboard ion thruster. But if anything unexpected comes up, then Starlink can also use that thruster for active collision avoidance, which is right now mostly used against space debris. The plan for Starlink on debris collision avoidance involves using data from the 18th Space Control Squadron, who perform radar tracking of all space debris. SpaceX uses an automated system that ingests data from the radar tracking to evaluate risks and plan avoidance maneuvers without human input. There are still people monitoring the system in case something unexpected comes up, but for the most part, Starlink already knows where the debris is and will get out of the way automatically. This is, I think, what might have been happening that freaked out the Chinese. My theory is that the Starlink from Incident 2 in the report was performing active collision avoidance, possibly stemming from the Russian satellite explosion debris. And to the Chinese, that might have looked like what they described as the continuous maneuvering that led them to move the station away. Not sure, but let us know if that sounds right to you in the comments. The third section they cover is called Starlink on Other Operator, which is obviously the last thing we want to see happen. SpaceX wrote to the FCC, when a maneuverable Starlink satellite sees a conjunction with another satellite without intervention, Starlink satellites will assume maneuver responsibility. If another operator prefers to maneuver instead, Starlink satellites can be commanded to remain ballistic for the span of the conjunction event. The company noted that, due to the lack of industry-standard automated maneuver responsibility arbitrage methods, Starlink satellites currently default to taking maneuver responsibility for conjunction events with other operators. Finally, there are the measures that Starlink is taking to make sure that their own satellites do not become dead hunks of junk orbiting the Earth for decades on end. At the beginning of each deployment, the Starlink is released at a very low altitude, about 270 kilometers up. Only after passing a health check can the satellite rise to its orbital slot. If the satellite does not pass the health check, then the orbital drag at 270 kilometers will quickly pull it down into the atmosphere, where friction will incinerate the whole thing. The Starlink is specifically designed to fully disassemble on re-entry and pose zero risk of damage or injury to anything or anyone on the Earth. And then, of course, SpaceX always has the option to manually decommission a Starlink by using the ion thruster to push it out of orbit and into the atmosphere to burn up. So that's an excessively deep dive into a bit of news that's been going around lately, but hopefully you learned something or at least came away with a better understanding of how things work in space. Let us know your theories on what the Chinese are up to down in the comment section below. For more Tesla news delivered straight to your inbox, make sure to subscribe to our Tesla Space newsletter. We keep you up to date on all things Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and Boring Company in one quick and fun to read package. Link in the description to sign up. It's theteslaspace.com. And make sure to drag our emails over into your primary inbox so we don't get lost in the promotions tab. Also, don't forget to check out our new Space Race channel and subscribe over there for even more space exploration content. As always, if you want to continue to learn about everything regarding Tesla, SpaceX, and Elon Musk, we've got 2 more video options for you on the screen to check out. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up today if you liked it, and subscribe to our channel for weekly content just like this.